There is an entire industry built on teaching you how to feel better without changing anything real. Buy another tool, start another ritual, download another app, repeat another affirmation, light another candle, journal another page, reframe another thought. And if you still feel trapped, the system gives you the same answer every time. You probably just need to try harder. But that is the scam. Most people are not stuck because they have failed to add enough good habits to their lives. They are stuck because they are still carrying identities that were built for survival and never meant to become permanent. That is the truth almost nobody wants to tell you. Real transformation is not additive, it is subtractive. You do not become free by stacking new practices on top of an old false self. You become free by removing the identities that keep shrinking your life. Some of those identities once saved you. That is why they are so hard to release. They were intelligent once. They helped you stay loved, stay safe, stay useful, stay accepted. But what protects you in one chapter can imprison you in the next. And if you do not learn how to let an old strategy die, you will spend your whole life calling a cage your personality. The first cage is the need to be seen as a good person. Not good, not honest, not grounded. The performance of goodness. The version of you that exists to make other people comfortable enough to keep you around. You know this identity if you have ever swallowed your first honest reaction because you did not want to seem harsh. If you have ever said yes while your body was already saying no. If you have ever smiled through disrespect because conflict felt more dangerous than self-betrayal. If you have ever explained a boundary like a legal defense because simply having one felt selfish. A lot of people call this maturity. A lot of people call this kindness. A lot of people are wrong. Most of the time, this is not kindness. It is fear in polite clothing. Fear of being disliked. Fear of disappointing someone. Fear that if you show your real anger, real edge, real limits, real needs, you will be judged, rejected, or abandoned. So you become easy. You become agreeable. You become edible. And because the world rewards people who are convenient, the pattern gets reinforced. People call you sweet, safe, calm, generous, easygoing. They praise the very thing that is slowly erasing you. This identity often begins in childhood. Maybe your home was unstable, and being the nice one kept the peace. Maybe your needs were treated like a burden, so you learned to reduce them. Maybe your honesty got punished, but your compliance got rewarded. Maybe being good was the only reliable way to receive affection. So you built a self that could survive by staying soft, useful, and non-threatening. That self was brilliant. It kept you safe. But the version of you that knew how to survive as a child does not automatically know how to live as an adult. And if you never update that identity, you become the kind of person who is easy to love superficially and difficult to know deeply. The cost is brutal. When you are attached to being seen as good, guilt becomes a weapon against you. Anyone who knows how to imply selfishness or cruelty can move you off your center. You become easy to pressure because your deepest fear is not making a mistake. It is losing your image as a decent person. So you absorb what should be confronted. You agree to what should be refused. You stay silent where you should be clear. And then resentment begins to grow in the dark. Because every time you abandon yourself to protect your image, something inside you notices. Your body keeps score. Your nervous system remembers the "no, you never said." And here is the deepest pain of all. People do not actually get to love you when you live this way. They only get to love the version of you that edits itself for approval. That is why so many good people are secretly exhausted, lonely, and angry. Their goodness got them acceptance, but not intimacy. It got them access, but not truth. You know this identity is finally dying when someone is disappointed in you, and you do not treat that disappointment like an emergency. When your no comes out clean. When your boundaries stop sounding like apologies. When you can be kind without making yourself disappear, that is not selfishness. That is the end of a survival role. And, for the first time in a long time, it is the beginning of becoming real. The second identity is the need to be needed. This one hides behind beautiful language, which is why so many people never question it. Service, empathy, loyalty, being there for people, holding space, loving hard, supporting everyone. On the surface, it looks generous. Sometimes it is generous. But often the deeper engine is not love. It is hunger. The hunger to matter by becoming indispensable. You know this pattern. If other people's problems wake up your sense of purpose faster than your own dreams do. If you feel most alive when someone is falling apart and strangely empty when life gets calm. If you are the person everyone leans on, everyone calls, everyone unloads on, and part of you resents it while another part of you would not know who to be without it. Chaos enters the room, and suddenly you become clear. You know your role. Fix, hold, advise, rescue, stabilize. You call it care, but many times it is identity management. This pattern usually starts early. Maybe the adults around you were unstable, and becoming the capable one made the house feel less dangerous. Maybe your feelings were ignored, but your usefulness was praised. Maybe being mature too soon got you love, attention, or relief from conflict. So you learned that value came from holding things together. You learned that being needed meant being safe. You learned that usefulness could buy belonging. That identity was intelligent. It helped you survive. But when it hardens into your personality, it creates a life organized around other people's crisis. That is why so many rescuers unconsciously surround themselves with people who are chaotic, wounded, overwhelmed, addicted, unavailable, or forever, almost changing. Healthy people do not need to be managed. Reciprocal people do not generate the same adrenaline. A calm relationship can feel unfamiliar to a nervous system trained to find meaning inside emergency. The rescuer says they want peace, but peace removes their role. And once the role is gone, a terrifying question appears. If no one needs me, what remains of me? Here is the darker truth most helpers never say out loud. If your identity depends on being needed, someone else's healing can quietly threaten you. You may consciously want them to get better, but unconsciously feel displaced when they stop depending on you. You may lose energy when they become strong. You may search for new things to fix, new ways to advise, new problems to hold, not because you are evil, because the role that organized your worth is starving. This is how compassion slowly turns into control without ever announcing itself. The cost is enormous. You take responsibility for outcomes that were never yours. You carry emotional weight you never consented to carry. You confuse over-involvement with love, depletion with devotion, anxiety with loyalty. Then, when the people you rescued remain messy, repeat the same patterns, ignore your effort, or collapse again, resentment arrives. You feel used, invisible, drained. But the painful truth is that many rescuers volunteered for a job no one actually assigned. They entered responsibility before consent and called the burden unfair afterward. The body always pays for this role. It pays in fatigue, headaches, vigilance, shallow breathing, short patience, private anger, and the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who need you but do not truly know you. Being relied on is not the same as being loved. Being useful is not the same as being seen. This identity also protects you from something, your own unresolved pain. It is easier to organize your life around everyone else's problems than to sit alone with the parts of yourself that still ache. Helping becomes an escape route from your own interior. Every crisis around you gives you somewhere else to look, somewhere else to go, somewhere else to matter. That is why this pattern is so addictive. It gives meaning fast and silence none. You know this identity is finally loosening when someone tells you what hurts, and you do not instantly turn their pain into your assignment. When you can care without taking over, when your first response is presence instead of strategy, when you stop measuring your worth by how much collapse you can absorb. Real love does not need to create dependence to feel significant. Real care does not need crisis to feel alive. The person who outgrows the rescuer identity does not become cold, they become clean. They stop feeding on emergency. They stop calling codependency compassion. And for the first time, they become available for a kind of love that is not built on exhaustion, bargaining, or the desperate need to matter. Peace stops feeling boring. It starts feeling holy. And you finally learn that your value was never supposed to depend on anyone else's instability. Finally, the third identity is the need to be understood. At first, this sounds harmless, even healthy. Of course, people want to feel seen. Of course, they want the people they love to understand where they are coming from. But there is a difference between sharing your inner world and depending on someone else's understanding in order to trust your own experience. On one side of that line is connection. On the other side is self-abandonment, dressed up as communication. You know this pattern if you keep returning to the same conversation, hoping that this time you will finally say it the right way. If you replay arguments in your head and write better speeches hours later, if you leave an interaction feeling not just disappointed, but erased. If misunderstanding does not feel like a normal human limit, but like a wound to your existence, that usually means you are not simply wanting connection. You are seeking permission for your reality to count. This pattern often begins in places where your perception was denied. Maybe you were told you were too sensitive, too dramatic, too emotional, too intense. Maybe your memory was questioned until you stopped trusting it. Maybe your feelings were minimized so often that you learned to consult other people before consulting yourself. That is how internal authority gets outsourced. You stop treating your own experience as valid on contact. You start waiting for another person to confirm that what you felt, saw, remembered, or meant was real. The cost is deeper than most people realize. When your sense of truth depends on being understood, anyone with stronger certainty can destabilize you. A dismissive partner can pull you into hours of explanation. A defensive parent can make you doubt what happened. A colder friend can turn your clarity into confusion just by refusing to acknowledge it. You start shaping your words around what other people can tolerate instead of what is accurate. You soften what matters. You trim what is sharp. You delay what is direct. You trade clean truth for a version they might be able to swallow. But legitimacy borrowed from someone else can always be withdrawn. This is why over-explaining is so exhausting. It is not just a communication habit. It is a trauma response trying to win back existence. You are not searching for perfect language because the idea is complicated. You are searching because a younger part of you still believes that if you can finally say it correctly, someone will look back at you and say, "Yes, that happened. Yes, that makes sense. Yes, I believe you. Yes, you are real." That is a heartbreaking way to live. It turns every misunderstanding into a courtroom and every conversation into an appeal. It also makes you easy to manipulate. People who do not want accountability can keep you trapped in the process of explaining instead of dealing with the truth itself. They can focus on your tone, your wording, your timing, your emotion, your examples, your memory, your sequence, your emphasis, your delivery. And because you are still trying to be understood, you keep accepting the frame. You keep clarifying while the center of the issue quietly disappears. This is one of the most sophisticated ways people lose themselves. Not through silence, but through endless explanation. There is another cost too: loneliness. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of constantly translating yourself for people who have not earned that access. It is exhausting to keep building bridges to people who refuse to cross them. Over time, your nervous system starts associating honesty with labor. You begin to feel tired before you even speak. You may become more articulate and less known at the exact same time. You know this identity is finally weakening when someone misunderstands you and you feel disappointed, maybe even sad, but not destabilized. When you explain once, maybe twice, and then stop. When you no longer treat another person's inability to receive you as proof that your inner world is invalid. When your first instinct is not to chase understanding, but to return to yourself. That is not arrogance. It is self-trust. Self-trust does not need a witness to become real. It does not require applause, interpretation, or consensus. It simply knows what it knows. The person who outgrows this pattern speaks more cleanly and less desperately. They stop throwing sacred truth into rooms that only want performance. They stop confusing comprehension with love. They stop outsourcing reality. And for the first time, they experience something many people spend years chasing without ever naming. The peace of no longer needing permission to exist as they are. And once that happens, your silence stops feeling like defeat. It starts feeling like dignity, protected on purpose. The fourth identity is attachment to potential. This one ruins people quietly because it often feels like depth. You tell yourself that you see who someone really is beneath the inconsistency, beneath the fear, beneath the avoidance, beneath the pain, beneath the habits that keep hurting you. You say they are trying. You say they are healing. You say they are almost ready. You say they would be different if life had been easier, if timing had been better, if stress had been lower, if love had reached them in the right way. And because you can see that future version so clearly, you keep giving grace to the present reality that is breaking your heart. This is one of the most painful places a human being can live. Not in relationship with what is, but in relationship with what might be, if enough change ever arrives. You know this pattern if repeated disappointment still gets translated into context, if neglect becomes confusion, if dishonesty becomes fear, if distance becomes pain, if inconsistency becomes a rough season, if your body keeps learning the same lesson while your hope keeps rewriting it. At some point, hope stops being a virtue and becomes a defense against grief. Jung understood this as projection, not because potential is imaginary, but because many people relate more to their idea of a person than to the person themselves. They place a meaningful image over actual behavior and then interact with the image. The image becomes the relationship. The image receives the loyalty. The image gets defended. Meanwhile, the real person keeps sending evidence, and the projection edits that evidence before it can reach decision-making. That is how people stay for years inside painful dynamics while calling themselves patient. They are not loyal to truth. They are loyal to the story they need truth to become. Why is this so hard to release? Because clear sight creates consequences. If you fully accept that this person is showing you who they are right now, not who they might become under ideal conditions, then something in your life must change. You may have to leave, or stop trusting, or stop waiting, or stop investing, or stop explaining away what keeps happening. Confusion lets you linger. Clarity demands movement. And many people would rather live inside emotional contradiction than face the clean pain of a decision. There is also ego in this pattern. You want your investment to mean something. You want the years, tears, patience, effort, forgiveness, and hope to lead somewhere worthy of the cost. You want your love to be powerful enough to call someone into their highest self. So you keep betting on future transformation because present reality would make the past unbearable. Potential becomes a sedative. It numbs urgency. It delays grief. It lets you call waiting a virtue when waiting is actually postponing truth. The cost is severe. You stop trusting your own eyes. Your standards become negotiable. Your body lives in contradiction, sensing what your mind keeps overruling. That split erodes self-respect. It teaches you to override evidence in the name of love. It keeps you loyal to possibility, while reality quietly trains you to accept less and less. This is how people lose years. Not because they were stupid, but because they confused hope with wisdom and projection with intimacy. Releasing this identity requires grief, and not the soft kind. You are not only letting go of a person, you are mourning a version of them that never fully existed outside your imagination. Your attachment was real, your longing was real, your hope was real. But the imagined future is not more sacred than the actual present. If someone repeatedly shows you what they can sustain, that is information. Not a puzzle, not a riddle, not a temporary illusion. Information. They stop negotiating with reality just to protect a dream. They stop using endless empathy to anesthetize clear evidence. They stop asking time to perform miracles that character has refused to perform. You know this identity is finally breaking when behavior starts to matter more than promise. When you stop calling inconsistency potential. When you stop lending your life to a future that has not arrived. When you can ask the clean question, if this person never changes, is what exists right now enough truth for me to decide? That question removes the drug of maybe. It removes fantasy. It returns you to the only place power has ever lived, reality. The person who outgrows this pattern does not become cynical. They become accurate. They stop loving ghosts. And in that clarity, they recover something sacred, self-respect, strong enough to prefer the pain of truth over the slow mutilation of false hope. That return to reality is brutal, but clean. The fifth identity is the one that makes every other trap harder to release. The identity of being wounded. This is the most delicate pattern because the pain under it is real. The betrayal happened. The neglect happened. The fear happened. The humiliation, the abandonment, the chaos, the violation, the deprivation, whatever shaped you, it matters. None of this is about pretending your pain was small or rushing into fake strength. The wound is real. The problem begins when the wound stops being something you carry and becomes the center of who you are. You know this pattern if your past is not just part of your story, but the main lens through which you interpret your present. If every new relationship gets filtered through old injury before the other person has even fully arrived. If your limitations, your fear, your expectations, your self-concept, your caution, and your explanations all keep returning to the same wound as the final authority on what is possible for you. At that point, you are no longer healing from what happened. You are living from it. The pain has become architecture. This identity is powerful because it offers benefits that few people admit out loud. When the wound is central, your struggle makes immediate sense. Your hesitations feel justified. People may treat you more gently. You may feel protected from the full weight of authorship because there is always a reason things are hard. There may be language for your pain, community around your pain, rituals around your pain, and an entire self-concept built around being the one who survived your pain. None of that is fake. It is simply incomplete. The same story that once gave shape to your suffering can quietly become the story that caps your future. This is one of the deepest traps of modern healing culture. People become fluent in what happened to them and mistake fluency for freedom. They can name every trigger, every pattern, every wound, every origin. They become articulate about the past. But articulation is not liberation. You can describe your prison beautifully and still remain inside it. In fact, a highly developed wounded identity can become harder to release because it is intelligent, socially legible, morally protected, and emotionally familiar. Nobody wants to challenge it, including you. What this pattern really costs is authorship. As long as the wound remains the center of your identity, your future stays in negotiation with your past. The old injury becomes editor, judge, translator, prophet. It tells you what to fear, how far to go, what kind of love is realistic, what kind of life is too risky, what kind of joy is too unstable to trust. You may think you are being careful. Often you are being governed by memory. The pain is no longer a chapter. It is the title. To release this identity is not to erase your scars. It is to become larger than them. Your pain becomes integrated instead of enthroned. It becomes part of your wisdom instead of the center of your name. You stop introducing yourself to life through what hurt you. You stop asking the wound to explain your future. And yes, that shift is terrifying, because once the wounded identity loosens, responsibility gets louder. Not blame, responsibility. The question changes from "what happened to me" to "who am I becoming now?" That question is where all 5 identities finally meet. The good person, the rescuer, the one who needs to be understood, the one attached to potential, the wounded self. Every one of them once answered a real need: safety, belonging, hope, meaning, protection. That is why releasing them feels like death. They are not bad habits. They are survival selves. It begins when you can remember without orbiting, grieve without building an altar, speak of the wound without asking it to tell you who you are today. But survival is not the same as freedom. At some point, protection hardens into prison. At some point, what once saved you starts shrinking you. Real transformation begins the day you stop asking how to improve the prison and start asking what bars you are finally willing to remove. Less performance, less rescuing, less pleading, less projection, less identification with pain. That is the path. Not glamorous, not quick, but real. You know this final identity is breaking when your history is no longer the most interesting thing about you. When your pain is part of your truth, but not the headline of your life. When you stop kneeling to what hurt you and start building from what is still alive in you. That is where freedom begins. Not when your past disappears, but when it stops being the author of your future. That is the work that lasts.